In the annals of planetary aviation history, there exists a singular moment that did more than just challenge the known laws of physics. It sent a chill down the spine of a superpower, a chill far colder than the deepest freeze of the Cold War winter. The year was 1975. The Northern Hemisphere was locked in a dual embrace of meteorological frost and political ice. In January of that year, the Grand Forks Air Force Base in North Dakota, USA, felt like the very edge of the civilized world. This was the heart of winter, a desolate expanse where the concrete of the tarmac was frozen as hard as granite. The mercury in the thermometers huddled desperately below the line of -20 degrees Celsius. The wind cut across the empty runways like a razor, its howling the only sound in a landscape where even time seemed to have frozen solid. The air was so cold it felt solid in the lungs, every breath a struggle against the elements. Yet, it was precisely here, in this place that seemed capable of freezing steel until it shattered, that a fire was being kindled. A fire of human ambition and engineering audacity, hot enough to melt the Iron Curtain. Thousands of miles away, on the other side of that curtain, inside the Mikhail Gurevich Design Bureau in Moscow. The atmosphere could not have been more different. In those offices, heavy with the scent of tobacco smoke and strong black tea. The air was warm, heated by radiators and the feverish intensity of the Soviet Union's brightest minds. For the elite engineers gathering under the portraits of Lenin and the cutaway diagrams of secret aircraft. The sky was not just a layer of gas wrapping the Earth, it was a domain of mathematical certainty. It was a stage where the Soviet Union flexed its industrial muscles. For the past decade, they had been the undisputed protagonists of this stage. Their confidence was anchored by a steel monster Cotton, MD-66. To the West, it was known by a name that evoked fear and the MiG-25 the Foxbat. If you are a student of aviation, or simply someone mesmerized by rock hour, the MiG-25 is a totem you cannot ignore. It was not a machine built for grace. It was a flying fortress welded together from stainless steel and titanium, a brute force industrial miracle. It was powered by TT Amansky R-15 turbojets engines, originally conceived for high-altitude drones or cruise missiles that functioned less like aircraft engines and more like erupting volcanoes. Relying on this unapologetic thrust, the MiG-25 could smash through the heat barrier and touch speeds of Mach 3. In that era, it was the nightmare scenario for Western air defense. It flew too fast and too high. By the time a radar blip appeared, interception was a mathematical impossibility. It was the sword of Damocles that the Kremlin held over NATO heads, the unshakable pillar of faith for Soviet engineers. They believed that while the Americans might lead in microchips in the realm of pure speed and altitude, the Soviet Union held absolute dominion. But that dominion, that arrogance built upon tons of steel and rivers of kerosene, began to crack on a gray morning in mid-January 1975. It started with a single brief telex message. It traveled through the undersea cables of the Atlantic, filtered through layers of intelligence networks, and finally landed on the desk of the chief designer at Mikoin. The slip of paper bore a set of date from the United States that was as cold as it was absurd. The report claimed that the U.S. Air Force was conducting a top-secret program at Grand Forks named Streak Eaglein, that they had just shattered the world record for climbing to 3,000 meters. The Soviet analysts stared at the number 27.57 seconds. A heavy silence fell over the room, followed immediately by an explosion of hushed whispers and incredulous denial. 27.57 seconds. How was that physically possible? Release the brakes on the runway, accelerate, rotate, retract landing gear, and pierce the cloud deck like an arrow. To reach 3,000 meters, roughly the initial climb altitude of a commercial airliner, in less than half a minute. This did not just violate common sense, it felt like an insult to physics itself. You have to understand, in those 27 seconds, the aircraft had to overcome the immense friction of the ground, the drag of the dense lower atmosphere, and the inertia of its own mass. The Soviet engineers grabbed their slide rules fingers, flying across abacus-and conversion charts, desperately trying to find the error. Surely the units were wrong, surely the timing start point was misunderstood in their mental models to achieve that kind of acceleration. The object should not be an airplane, it should be a surface-to-air missile launching from a rail, but the nightmare was only just beginning. Before they could fabricate a comforting excuse for this first anomaly, a second report slammed onto the desk like a sledgehammer. 6,000 meters in 39.33 seconds, then 9,000 meters in 48.86 seconds. Then 12,000 meters in 59.38 seconds, 1 minute, less than 60 seconds. In the time it took a pedestrian in Moscow to wait for a traffic light to change this American machine, the Streak Eagle, had gone from a standstill to the stratosphere 12,000 meters up. This was the operational ceiling of most commercial jets. The Soviets' beloved MiG-25, the king that had ruled the record books, with its brutal, ISE aesthetic, had not just been beaten. It had been pulverized, erased by a force that was purer, more efficient, undoubtedly despair-inducing. This mysterious American aircraft seemed to mock the Soviet heaviness. It climbed as if the atmosphere did not exist, as if drag was a concept that applied only to others. Panic, like an invisible virus, began to spread through the upper echelons of the Soviet aviation industry. They desperately needed to know. What was this Streak Eagle? Was it a secret American aerospace plane? Was it powered by some alien nuclear propulsion? When the first grainy spy photographs were finally smuggled into Moscow, the confusion only deepened. The silhouette in the photos was unmistakably the F-15 Eagle, the fighter the U.S. Air Force was just beginning to field. But it looked wrong, it looked ghostly. It did not wear the signature compass, ghost gray camouflage of the U.S. Air Force. It bore no squadron patches, no tactical numbers. Its fuselage was a bizarre patchwork of colors, gold, brown, and silver, woven together like the hide of a skinned beast, revealing the muscle and sinew beneath. A Soviet materials expert pressed a magnifying glass to the photo, his voice rambling as he delivered the verdict. Comrades, this is naked metal, this is the skin without paint. Yes, that was the origin of the name Streak Eagle. For this duel of speed and dignity, the Americans had made a fanatical decision. They had stripped this F-15 fighter of every single ounce of weight that was not critical to flight. The paint that protected the airframe from corrosion scraped off, that saved a few dozen pounds. The M61 Vulcan cannon removed, the radar jettisoned. The fire control system, the survival kit in the ejection seat, even the hydraulic actuators for the air brake gone. This explains the raw industrial texture in the photos. It was the natural color of aluminum, titanium, and steel alloys oxidizing in the air. This was no longer a machine built for combat. It had been transformed into and projectile, a pure vehicle built for one singular mission. To go up and to go up fast. Looking past the naked metal skin, the Soviet engineers saw something that terrified them even more. The thrust-to-weight ratio. This is the holy grail of aviation engine. Nearing, simply put, it is the ratio of the engine's thrust to the aircraft's weight. For a long time, only rockets could achieve a ratio greater than 1:1 for jet aircraft. The takeoff weight was always heavier than the thrust, meaning they needed runways and wings to generate lift to fight gravity. But the Streak Eagle, stripped to its bones and mated with two Pratt & Whitney F-100PW100 turbofan engines, had achieved the impossible. With afterburners fully lit, these engines generated nearly 50,000 pounds of terrifying thrust, while the castrated fighter weighed less than 30,000 pounds, a thrust-to-weight ratio approaching 1.5:1. What does that mean? It means this aircraft no longer needed aerodynamic lift to fly. It did not need wings. You could chop the wings off, and as long as the nozzles pointed down, it would shoot up like a rocket. This explained why the Soviet mathematical models had failed. In traditional calculations, an aircraft loses speed as it climbs vertically against gravity, but this monster, while climbing straight up 90 degrees to the horizon, it was not slowing down. It was accelerating in a head-on collision with gravity. It was winning. It was like a car driving up a vertical wall and speeding up until it punched a hole in the sky as January faded into February. This record-breaking spree turned into a siege on the Soviet psychological defense line. The 15,000-meter record fell, then 20,000. Then 25,000. Every click of the telex machine was a slap in the face of Soviet aviation. Finally, the Americans announced their ultimate target. 30,000 meters. 30,000 meters, that is nearly 100,000 feet. This is no longer the realm of the atmosphere. It is the doorstep of space. Up there, the sky is not blue, it is a deep, terrifying purple minus black. Up there, the air is too thin to support combustion, too thin to even carry sound. Up there, water boils at room temperature and blood vaporizes. To fly at this altitude requires not just technology, but a kind of madness that sneers at death. The experts at the MiG-25 Bureau stared at the declaration. They knew that even for the MiG-25, reaching this height required a very specific flight profile and massive energy reserves. But for this F-15, without ram jets, without rocket boosters, the only way to touch that altitude was to gamble with life itself, to trade kinetic energy for potential energy, to coast up like a stone thrown by a giant. It was a flight plan balanced on the edge of a knife. On the day of the attempt, on the runway at Grand Forks, the engines of the Streak Eagle roared. It was a sound different from any standard jet stripped of insulation and fairings. It was the scream of metal tearing through air, the barking of a hellhound. In the cockpits at Major Roger Smith, a man who for the next few minutes would transform himself into part of a human cannonball. The brakes released and the fighter shot forward, as if launched from a slingshot. After rolling only a few hundred feet, it rotated, but not to climb. It stayed low, terrifyingly low. Meters above the frozen ground, streaking across the Dakota plains at near supersonic speeds. This was to utilize the ground effect and to build up maximum kinetic energy in the dense, oxygen-rich air. As the airspeed indicator spun wildly, breaking the sound barrier, Major Smith pulled back on the stick at the end of the runway. For GS, 5GS, 6GS, the massive gravitational forces slammed into him, crushing him into his seat, draining the blood from his brain to his feet. His vision undled, but he did not let go. He pointed the nose straight up, a perfect 90 degrees at this moment. He was not flying, he was launching. The earth fell away behind him, becoming a blurry backdrop, leaving only the dark abyss of the zenith to welcome him. The altimeter spun so fast the numbers were a blur. 10,000 meters, 20,000 meters. As the altitude increased, the air thinned, and the engines began to choke. This is a jet engine's worst nightmare. Compressors stall, starved of air. The flames in the combustion chamber exploded forward, causing the airframe to shudder violently, but under Smith's control, he let the shuddering happen. He had to wring every ounce of energy from the fuel. As the aircraft smashed through 25,000 meters, the engines finally gave up the ghost. They flamed out. Can you imagine the terror of that moment? In a split second, the monstrous roar vanished, replaced by a spine-chilling silence, broken only by the groaning of the metal skin contracting in the freezing cold. Red warning lights flashed manically in the cockpit. No power, no hydraulic pressure, no cabin pressurization. At 30,000 meters, he was sitting in a flying metal coffin. But this was part of the plan. Even without power, the fighter, riding on the momentum of its violent acceleration, continued to shoot upward like a bullet. It traced a perfect parabola into the silence, 207.8 aeroseconds. When the timer stopped, Major Roger Smith was floating at the apex of the trajectory. 30,000 meters up, he saw the curvature of the Earth. He saw the darkness of space. Above, at that moment, he was one of the highest humans on the planet, but also the most endangered. The aircraft reached the top of the arc and its speed dropped to zero. Now he had to face the Reaper's judgment, the fall. The aircraft began to drop, tumbling like a stone. The control surfaces were useless in the near vacuum. He was being thrashed around in the cockpit. He had to patiently wait for gravity to drag him back down to where the atmosphere was thick enough to breathe. It was a psychological gamble with death, try to restart the engines too early in the violent combustion in the thin air. Would shatter the turbine blades, turning him into a fireball. Restart too latent, he would not have enough altitude to pull out of the dive. Slamming into the ground at supersonic speeds, creating nothing but a crater. The Soviet generals reading the profile of this flight felt their palms sweat. They imagined themselves in the cockpit tumbling in freefall, watching the altimeter unwind the ground, rushing up like a wall. 10,000 meters, 8,000 meters, just moments before death would have embraced him. Major Smith's finger hit the restart button. The OOM with a thunderous crack, the F-100 engines railed in the lower atmosphere, spitting tons of 4-inch fire. The hydraulic systems pressurized, the stick became heavy with resistance again. He pulled the nose up, mere thousands of feet above the ground. The G-forces crushing him once more, the wings vibrating violently in the thick air, threatening to snap. But he made it. He leveled out, carrying a cold sweat and date world records, and brought the bird home. This sequence shattered the Soviet delusion. If the earlier records could be dismissed as stunts, this capability to flame out in near space, tumble, restart, and recover proved this was not just a racing machine. It was a weapon of war with terrifying survivability and fault tolerance. The analysts in Moscow finally saw the truth. They had assumed the Americans were cheating with rocket boosters or exotic single-use fuels, but now they understood. The reality was far more frightening. The Americans had not added anything, they had only subtracted. They had simply taken a standard mass-produced F-15 and emptied it. This meant that the F-15 airframe itself possessed an aerodynamic advantage that drove the Soviets to despair. The MiG-25 flew fast because it used two massive engines to brute force a brick through the sky. The F-15, however, was a rocket strapped to a perfect glider. Its body was a lifting body. Its aerodynamics were so exquisite that even fully loaded with missiles and radar, it would possess maneuverability that would allow it to toy with the clumsy MiG-25 in a dogfight. The Soviets thought they were building the ultimate interceptor to hunt American bombers. They looked at the Streak Eagle data and realized with horror that the Americans had built an aerial dominator capable of hunting everything. Operation Streak Eagle was not just a record-breaking campaign, it was a masterclass in psychological warfare. It was the destruction of a strategic bluff. By stripping away layers of paint and electronics, the U.S. displayed the bare-naked terror of the F-15. A pure, unbridgeable generational gap in engineering. When the dust settled, the lights in the Moscow Design Bureau burned all night. They looked at the blueprints of the MiG-25 on the wall. The pride of yesterday now looked clumsy and obsolete. They knew an era had ended. The era of conquering the sky through sheer tonnage and thrust was over. It had been replaced by a new age of precision aerodynamics and energy maneuverability. History would prove their fears well-founded. The F-15 Eagle, in its decades of service following that winter, would go on to achieve the most incredible statistic in the history of modern aerial warfare: 104 aerial victories, 0 losses. The prologue to that myth was written by that paint-less naked Streak Eagle screaming back from the edge of space in the winter of 1975. It taught the world a lesson: when humanity decides to conquer the sky, sometimes you do not just need to add more power. Sometimes you need to strip away every shackle and face the judgment of the heavens with a naked soul. This is the story of the Streak Eagle, a legend of the Cold War, of speed and of the madness required to touch the face of the void. If you crave more deep dives into the steel-clad secrets of Cold War aviation and the engineering marvels that defined an era, engage your afterburners and hit that subscribe button. I am your strategy observer, signing off from the edge of the atmosphere. I will see you on the next flight deck.